So hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. So my name is Surya and today is 21st November 2025 and today we have some important topics from different newspapers. So one by one we'll be discussing all these important topics. So here is the list of topics that we are going to discuss today, and let's start with the first topic, and this topic is about the presidential reference. So that has been sought on governors' timelines on the bills. Now first of all we should try and understand the context of this topic before going into this discussion. Now the context is that in Tamil Nadu what has been happening is governor is not giving assent to the bills passed by the state legislative assembly. Now in fact the indecision on the part of the governor when it comes to giving assent to the bills, that has led to Tamil Nadu government approaching the Supreme Court on this. Now in fact the Supreme Court has imposed timelines on both governor and president that within 3 months both governor and president must give their assent to the bills passed by the state legislative assemblies. So however, after that president sought the presidential reference on this judgment of the Supreme Court. So on this presidential reference, the Supreme Court has actually made important remarks on pending bills with governor and president. So let's understand this. I hope you have understood the context very briefly. So we'll understand all relevant aspects of this. Now first understand that this is a topic that has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and from the syllabus point of view, this is very important for General Studies paper 2. Now let's understand the context first. So as I've already given you a brief context on this. Now Supreme Court has actually issued a significant opinion on the 16th presidential reference. So President sought a reference on the judgment issued by the Supreme Court with respect to setting timelines on the bills passed by the state legislative assemblies, and those bills are with the president or governor. So later, President sought a reference called a 16th presidential reference. So therefore, the Supreme Court has issued its opinion on the 16th presidential reference. Now, in fact, the Supreme Court has also clarified that courts cannot impose a fixed timelines or presumed deemed consent for bills pending with the president or governors, because the Supreme Court believed that courts setting timelines for president and governor on these bills, it amounts to violation of separation of powers, so which is a doctrine that has been recognized by the Indian Constitution. So I hope it is clear, because it amounts to the judiciary interfering with the executive, so that is against the principle of separation of powers. But at the same time, within the 16th presidential reference, the Supreme Court has also held that constitutional authorities should not unnecessarily delay giving assent to the bills passed by the state legislative assemblies without any proper reason or rationale. So this is what the Supreme Court has briefly said in this context. So if you look at the previous judgment of the Supreme Court with respect to pending assent with governor and president, so Supreme Court has actually set a time frame. So there should be a time frame of 3 months, and within 3 months both governor and president must give their respective assent. So however, let's understand this. So Article 200 of the Indian Constitution, so it says that the governor would have certain options before him or her when a bill has been passed by the state legislative assembly and then the bill sent to the governor for his or her assent. So what are the options that the governor will have on the bill passed by the state legislative assembly? So one, the governor can give his assent, a governor can withhold his assent, governor can send a bill for the reconsideration of the state legislative assembly, and the fourth option is governor can reserve the bill for the presidential consent. So 4 options that Article 200 is talking about, but Article 200 has not mentioned any specific timeline. So it has not mentioned any timeline within which governor must give his or her assent, and that is main problem here. So therefore, the Supreme Court in that particular judgment where Tamil Nadu government approached the Supreme Court, so in that particular judgment, the Supreme Court has held that governor has maximum of 1 month to withhold assent to the bill on the aid and advice of the state cabinet. Right. So apart from that, The governor will have a maximum of 3 months is given to return the bill within a message specifying reasons if the governor withholds assent contrary to the cabinet's advice. And in fact, governors have 3 months to reserve the bills for the presidential consideration against the advice of the cabinet. So this is also contrary to the advice of the cabinet. This is also contrary to the advice of the cabinet. However, with respect to the advice of the cabinet, the governor can reserve a bill only for 1 month. And apart from that, governor must grant assent to the bill repassed by the State Legislative Assembly under Article 200 within a maximum of 1 month. If governor resend the bill for the reconsideration of the State Legislative Assembly and State Legislative Assembly passed the bill again and sent to the governor for his or her assent, the governor must give his assent within 1 month to those bills. So this is what the Supreme Court has held that with respect to giving assent to the bills. So I hope you have understood this. Now let's discuss what the Supreme Court has specifically said in this presidential reference. The Supreme Court has held that governors cannot sit over the bills beyond powers granted to them under Article 200. Now, as I have already told you that Article 200 is silent on the timeline within which a governor must give his or her assent to the bills. Now, in fact, governor cannot act as a super chief ministers. So this is what the 5-judge bench unanimously held. And in fact, in earlier judgment, the Supreme Court has also held that there should be a clear time frame and timeline for the governor to give his or her assent to the bills. Now, in fact, fixing these timelines for the governors in a democratic country like India is against the elasticity provided by the Constitution. Now, what is this elasticity provided by the Constitution? So, first thing that we should understand here, so there is a constitutionally recognized separation of powers in India along with the checks and balances as well. So these checks and balances are reasonable checks and balances. Now in India, we don't have a strict separation of powers as well. Now in this context, the Supreme Court has held that court should not fix such timelines because it amounts to the judiciary interfering with the executive and its role. Right? So therefore, it is against the elasticity provided by the Constitution. This is what the Supreme Court has clearly opined in this presidential reference. Now, in fact, the governors will have 3 options when any bill has been passed by the State Legislative Assembly and then the bill has been sent to the concerned governor. The governor will be having 3 options. So what are the options? So governor may grant his assent to the bills passed by the State Legislative Assembly. Second option, governor may refer the bill to the president for his or her assent. Or governor may withhold the assent to the bill as well. And the third option, send them back to the assembly with comments with reasons why he has been sending the bill back to the State Legislative Assembly. So, however, the third option is available only when it is not a money bill. The Supreme Court has clearly highlighted this because the money bill is introduced in the State Legislative Assembly with the previous consent of the governor. And because of that reason, a governor must give his assent to the money bills. So I hope it is clear for you. These are the 3 options which are available to the governor when any bill has been passed and sent to the governor for his or her assent. So however, governors also enjoy discretion in choosing from these 3 options and they are not bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers with respect to the 3 options. Right? So therefore, the Supreme Court has clearly mentioned that these 3 options, exercising these 3 options, governors will have a discretionary power. However, for inaction that is prolonged, unexplained, without any reason, without any proper rationale, and delaying giving assent to the bills for an indefinite period of time, courts can issue a limited mandamus for governor to act on those bills which are pending with the governor. Right? So courts can issue a mandamus ordering the governor to discharge functions on a reasonable time. So this is what the court has mandated that. However, the governor's role when it comes to giving assent to the bills. So they cannot supplanted by another authority by way of deemed assent, and Supreme Court's bench has said this. Right? So in fact, the concept of courts declaring a deemed assent, so it is antithetical to the spirit of the Constitution, and it is also against the doctrine of separation of powers. Now in fact, judiciary, executive and legislature, so these are three different branches of the government. So one should not interfere in the functioning of the other branch of the government, and that is the basic principle of the doctrine of separation of powers. The court clearly held that courts setting a timeline for the presidential assent to the bills by the governor is against the doctrine of separation of powers, and it also amounts to the virtual takeover of functions of the governor. So governor is a constitutional authority. His functions are also having the constitutional backing as well. The courts cannot take over the constitutionally provided functions of governor, and this is what the Supreme Court's opinion on this matter. And in fact, Article 361 of the Indian Constitution, this is also an exception to Article 14, right to equality. Now Article 361 of the Indian Constitution provides certain immunities for both president and governor. Now Article 361, governors enjoys personal immunity, but their constitutional office is subjected to court's jurisdiction. Right, so this is what the Supreme Court has clearly mentioned. And apart from that, discharge of functions under Article 200 and Article 201, right, so it deals with action on the bills by the governor. Right, so both Article 200 and Article 200, it deals with the governor and president. It comes under the justiciable right. So what is justiciable? So justiciable in the sense that, courts can actually intervene. It can be enforceable by the courts, right? So meaning they cannot be challenged before the court, right? So judicial review and scrutiny can be involved only once the bills become law. Right? So therefore Article 200 and Article 201 are not justiciable in nature, not justiciable in that in the sense that courts cannot enforce them, and judicial review and judicial scrutiny can be involved only once the bill becomes a law. Right? So the clarification for future governance, it does not vacate, modify or amend relief granted to the TN judgment. Right, so this is what in detail the Supreme Court has held that. Right, so again, let's understand the key observations made by the Supreme Court in this particular judgment. Now, this is a constitution bench of the Supreme Court, and this constitution bench of the Supreme Court held that a judiciary cannot bind president and governors with the timelines within which both these constitutional offices must give assent to the bills passed by the state legislative assemblies, because it would amount to the judiciary intruding into the executive discretion, and it also violates the principle of separation of powers. And in fact, this principle of separation of powers is part of the basic structure doctrine. So this is the first very important observation made by the Supreme Court as part of the presidential reference. Now, Supreme Court has also held that imposing one size fits all deadline. So what is this one size fits all deadline? So under Article 200, the governor will have certain options when it comes to giving assent to the bills. However, the Supreme Court has mandating a 3 months of time frame for most of the bills. So this is a one size fits all deadline, assuming that deemed assent would amount to usurpation of gubernatorial functions, and it would also undermine the constitutional intent, and it also amounts to the interference of the judiciary in the executive functions. So this constitutional bench has been led by the Chief Justice of India, B.R. Gawai, and he emphasized that judicial discretion cannot override the constitutional scheme governing giving assent to the bills by the constitutional officers like governor and president. Now, at the same time, the constitutional bench of the Supreme Court has also clarified that president and governors, they cannot justify endless inaction. So they cannot keep bills for an indefinite period of time without any reason and rationale. Now, at that point of time, the courts may intervene, asking governor and president to give their assent to the bills if there is no proper reason, without any reason, if they are keeping bills with them for an indefinite period of time. Now, this presidential reference came soon after the April judgment, and this April judgment by the Supreme Court has fixed a 3-month time limit for disposing of pending bills, and that prompted a need for clarity on the constitutional boundaries between the executive and the judiciary. So that is in line with the principle of separation of powers. So let's understand court's guidance on governor's powers under Article 200. So what court has emphasized on this matter? Now, in fact, the Supreme Court has explained that governor has 3 options under Article 300 of the Indian Constitution, as I have already discussed this with you. Giving assent to the bills, or withholding assent to the bills, or reserving the bills for the consideration of the president, or resending the bills to the state legislative assembly for reconsideration by the legislative assemblies. So these are the 3 options that the governor would have. However, with respect to the money bills, the governor must give his or her assent to the money bills, because money bills are introduced with the previous consent of the president. So I hope it is clear. Now, the Supreme Court has held that governors cannot sit on a bill without returning it, as doing so violates the feature of federalism, and it also weakens the state legislature, and state legislature is elected through the popular vote, right? So it clearly says that governors cannot sit on bills for an indefinite period of time without any proper reason or rationale, and they must give their assent unless there are strong reasons for not giving assent to the bills. Now, in fact, the judicial review cannot assess the merits of a governor's decision. It cannot assess the merits of governor's decision, but it can address the cases of unexplained indefinite inaction through limited mandamus. And apart from that, if courts issues mandamus for the office of the governor, right? So the mandamus would ask the governor to perform his or her duty, giving assent to the bills. Now, in fact, governor remains protected under Article 361 of the Indian Constitution, because Article 361 of the Indian Constitution provides immunity to the constitutional offices of president and governor. So therefore, both president and governor enjoys immunity from the judicial proceedings. So let's understand what is this presidential reference and Article 200 of the Indian Constitution. Now, in fact, this presidential reference is governed under Article 143 of the Indian Constitution. Now, in fact, Article 143 of the Indian Constitution, it allows president to seek the Supreme Court's opinion on questions of law or public importance. If there is any question which is a question of law or a question of public importance, on those type of questions, president can actually sought the opinion of the Supreme Court, and this is what the presidential reference that Article 143 governs. So this presidential reference is the 16th presidential reference to the Supreme Court from the president. Now, apart from that, we have already discussed about Article 200 of the Indian Constitution, the options that the governor will have once the bill has been passed by state legislative assembly and sent to the governor for his or her assent. However, courts can intervene only in cases of constitutional stagnation and not to evaluate the policy choices. right? So in fact, court also strongly respects the doctrine of separation of powers, and court has also mentioned that this doctrine of separation of powers is also part of the basic structure of the Indian constitution. Therefore, this doctrine restricts judiciary from performing executive functions like granting and assuming assent, right? So in this context, the court has also made some observations that federalism demands governors act in a harmony with elected legislature, so not to override or delay their decisions in an arbitrary manner, right? So this is what the presidential reference and Article 200 of the Indian Constitution and Supreme Court's observations. So let's understand another very important topic that has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and from the syllabus point of view, this is very important for General Studies paper 1 geography, and at the same time it is also important for General Studies paper 3 as well. Now the topic is air pollution a South Asian crisis? Let's understand this. Now why it is a news? Now it is a news because the 2024 India-Pakistan smog, it has renewed the concerns about escalating air pollution across South Asia, right? So in fact, the air pollution is one of the major problem that the South Asian countries have been facing, because Delhi and Lahore, they have recorded some of the world's worst air quality index levels. So this has been highlighting the challenges and the problems that the South Asian countries have been facing when it comes to dealing with the air pollution as a problem. Now, in fact, international environmental organizations like United Nations Environment Program, Greenpeace, World Bank, and even the Lancet survey. So all these different surveys have clearly highlighted that there would be a severe environmental, health, economic consequences if this levels of air pollution further continues, and if South Asian countries failed to act against this air pollution. So therefore, it is very important to find out long-term regional solutions to deal with the problem of air pollution, and this is what the most of the international organizations and their reports have highlighted. So let's understand what exactly makes air pollution a South Asian crisis, right? So what are the factors which actually make air pollution a South Asian crisis? Now, in fact, first thing that we should understand about the air pollution, it is a cross-border nature. So cross-border nature in the sense that, for example, if there is a severe level of air pollution in India, now this a very severe level of air pollution can also be expected in adjoining countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, and even Pakistan. So therefore, the Indo-Gangetic Plains, a fixed topography, so it actually traps the air pollutants, thereby making the entire region, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, so they are highly vulnerable to the air pollution. That is because of the geography, the fixed topography which has been trapping the air pollutants in this Indo-Gangetic Plains. Secondly, if you look at the World Bank's data on air pollution, so this World Bank's data on air pollution reveals us that 9 out of 10 most polluted cities, so they are located in South Asia. So across the world, 9 out of 10 most polluted cities, they are located in South Asia alone. So therefore, South Asia as a region, world's worst performing region in terms of air quality. So this data we should understand. And apart from that, all South Asian nations, so they have a similar patterns of development. So therefore, it is also very common that most of the South Asian nations should also have a similar levels of air pollution, except countries like Sri Lanka, Bhutan, right? So therefore, rapid urbanization, vehicular congestion, industrial clusters, a similar pattern of development that you can observe in most of the South Asian countries, and that is another factor that all these South Asian countries have been experiencing a similar level of air pollution. Now apart from that, the airshed concept. Now according to this airshed concept, IIT Bhubaneswar studies, so they highlighted that region behaves like a one interconnected airshed. The entire South Asian region is like a one interconnected airshed. So therefore it requires joint governance mechanisms from the South Asian countries to deal with the problem of air pollution. However, so there are some countries within South Asia which are considered as a less affected countries. For example, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bhutan. So most of these countries have relatively manageable air quality index. So this is because of the favorable geography that they have, lower industrial density and afforestation or a green cover that they have. Because of all these reasons, so they have comparatively manageable levels of AQI. Now let's understand what are the key factors behind South Asia's air pollution. So there might be some factors which could be the major reasons for air pollution. So what could be those drivers? So firstly, we have to understand the anthropogenic sources. There are certain human activities, and those human activities are mainly responsible for the severe levels of air pollution. Now, in fact, a report called Greenpeace 2023 report. Now, this report has highlighted that the key drivers of pollution in India are industrial emissions, vehicular exhaust, and solid fuel burning. So these could be the three main reasons for severe levels of air pollution across country, particularly in the metropolitan cities. Now, apart from that, if you look at the urbanization, so construction activities have been taking place. There are industries, and apart from that, open landfills, and these open landfills sometimes burnt, so they are releasing toxic fumes into the air. And in metropolitan cities like Delhi, the stubble burning has been taking place in adjoining states, and stubble burning has also been releasing in air pollution, right? So this toxic air which is entering into cities like Delhi, and due to winters there has been a stagnation, air has not been moving. So therefore all these factors are another major reason for the severe levels of air pollution. And then agricultural practices, particularly we need to talk about the stubble burning which is practiced in states like Rajasthan, Western UP and Punjab and even Haryana. Right, so this could be another major reason for the air pollution. And then vehicular explosion, due to increasing vehicles which are based on fossil fuels, the vehicular emissions, they are also the major contributor of air pollution in the major cities all across India. And then poor waste management, because the open landfill sites where waste is dumped, sometimes those open landfill sites are also burned. So they are also releasing a toxic air into the atmosphere, mostly in tier 1 and tier 2 cities, contributing to the air pollution. So these are the major drivers of air pollution in India. So however, what are the economic, social and health impacts on India? Let's understand this aspect as well. So firstly, we'll try and understand the economic burden, right? Because it is having economic burden, healthcare burden, social burden, poverty. So all these reasons. So according to Lancet survey, so India lost 36% of its GDP in 2019 due to premature deaths and illness, which are mainly linked to air pollution. So 36% of GDP is not a small number. So therefore you can understand the gravity of this problem first. Secondly, if you look at the healthcare cost of air pollution, now high AQI levels, they force India to spend around 3% of India's GDP on healthcare and productivity losses that India has been facing because of the poor air quality or air pollution. Now, because of air pollution, the labor productivity will also declines over a period of time, because when labor have been suffering with chronic respiratory diseases, So it reduces the workforce participation, especially in the informal sector workers. Now, particularly for a country like India, where 85% of the workers have been engaged in the informal workforce, this is a very serious problem. And then we need to talk about the human development concerns. There are several low income groups, farmers, children and elderly populations. So they face a very high vulnerability because of air pollution. And then we should also talk about the pollution which has been having a higher impact on vulnerable groups such as poor, and therefore it has been raising concerns about health equity and fairness. So these are social health and economic impacts of rising air pollution. So what needs to be done? So there is a need for a comprehensive suggestions that have to be suggested in this context. So what suggestions that we could actually make? Now, in fact, so why don't we have an airshed level governance model with all South Asian countries which have been impacted by the air pollution? For example, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal. So they must build a South Asian clean air framework. Their objective is ensuring that the air quality is improved in a region as a whole. Secondly, the environmental cooperation should be prioritized by the countries despite the bilateral tensions. SAARC, BIMSTEC platforms can be revived in this context to deal with the problem of air pollution. And apart from that, agricultural reforms need to be brought in. The agricultural reforms must prevent stubble burning, and it should focus on crop diversification and promoting technologies like happy seeders and decentralizing biomass markets so they can reduce stubble burning on a large scale, and they could also reduce the air pollution levels. So after that, we should also talk about the urban mobility transition. So for that to happen, expand public transport, promote electric buses, cycling infrastructure, and even the congestion pricing as well. And then industrial cleanup is another area that we need to focus on, right? For that, mandatory adoption of end-of-pipe technologies, emission trading schemes, and even stricter environmental audits that have to be conducted regularly. And there is a need to revive and create urban forests, wetlands, green buffers to improve natural ventilation and filtration. So all these measures must be adopted across the South Asian countries to deal with the problem of environmental pollution in a much more effective and efficient manner. So let's understand another very important topic, right? So that topic is about the volcanic eruption that took place in Indonesia. So this is a Semeru Mount eruption. So let's understand about this Semeru Mount eruption. So this has been given in the Indian Express newspaper, and from the syllabus point of view, this is very important for General Studies paper 1, right? So let's understand about this volcanic eruption. Now firstly, let's understand the context of this. The context is that Indonesia's Mount Semeru, so it is one of the most active volcanoes in the country. So it has erupted in Wednesday. So it has released hot ash clouds and volcanic debris into the air. Now you can see here, this is Indonesia's Java, and this is where Mount Semeru is located. Sumatra, Java and Borneo, right? So this is where Mount Semeru has been located, and Mount Semeru might be important for the prelims exam as well. So therefore you have to remember this. So therefore this eruption has renewed focus on the causes of volcanic activity and why certain volcanoes are more explosive than the other mountains or volcanoes. So let's understand how volcanic eruptions actually takes place. Now these volcanic eruptions are primarily driven by the heat movement beyond the Earth's crust. So if you look at the Earth, so it has different layers: crust, mantle and core. So beneath Earth's crust, the heat movements primarily shapes the volcanic eruptions. because beneath the earth's crust the temperatures are very high, because with increasing depth temperatures will increase, and these temperatures are even enough to melt rocks into magma. So since magma is lighter than the surrounding solid rock, what happened is that this magma started rising above and accumulate in magma chambers. These magma chambers are also very close to the surface area. However, after these magma chambers are filled with the magma, they exert intense pressure on surrounding rock layers over the surface, eventually causing magma to push through cracks and fissures. So once magma reaches the surface, it erupts as lava, marking a full volcanic event. So this is how the volcanic eruptions are actually taking place. So Mount Semeru's eruption has involved ash flumes and even pyroclastic material, so which is typical of volcanoes with a very high pressure magma buildup that has been taking place. However, the impact of such eruption on local communities can be severe, and sometimes it even leads to the mass internal relocations as well. Right? So that's all for today, and thank you so much. So please subscribe our YouTube channel and also like a video. Thank you so much.